Welcome back, Synod. Welcome back, Synod, for this evening's session. We come to items 15 and 16, National Church Governance. Item 15 is a presentation, and then item 16 is a motion for debate. I should tell you that you'll need to have GS 2307 handy, and also the new Order Paper 5, as we do have 5 amendments for that motion. I would like to invite Sir David Liddington, Chair of the Governance Review Project Board, to address Synod. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of Synod, thank you for the invitation to come and speak this evening. I've got to be frank. Until I was asked to take on this role of chairing the project board, I'd never taken any particular interest in church governance. I would just sit in the pew or the chair or the choir stalls and trust that the system was working. But the case for reform, the fact that it wasn't working particularly well, was set out starkly in the Governance Review Group's report, which was led by the Bishop of Leeds and debated in Synod last year. A confusing lack of clarity over who was responsible for decisions. Some governance bodies failing to realise that they had a duty under church and charity law to take decisions about a particular policy area. Others asserting their right to take decisions without any legal authority. Scrutiny by the Synod not working well, leading to deep dissatisfaction and frustration amongst Synod members. And pervading everything, a lack of transparency, with a plethora of committees, subcommittees, commissions and boards, a bureaucratic tangle in which it was almost impossible to take even urgent decisions clearly and quickly, or to hold decision takers to account, and which soaked up hours of time on the part of hard-pressed church staff. For readers of Charles Dickens, it was all reminiscent of the stifling bureaucracy of the Circumlocution Office, described in Little Dorrit, with its motto, "How not to do it." And this, let us never forget, has been the system of governance for the stewardship and spending of many millions of pounds of charitable funds, and where a failure of governance risks profound damage to the reputation of the Church of England, as anyone listening to this afternoon's proceedings will have realised. Things do need to change. But during the 17 months that the project board has been working on our proposals and consulting the widest possible range of organisations within the church, it has become ever more clear to us as a board that the challenge facing the church is not only administrative, but also cultural. And let me be frank. Having never previously been involved in church governance, I have been personally shocked by the depth of resentment and mistrust that pervades relationships between different organisations, traditions, and people within the church family. Governance reform will not on its own deliver the cultural change needed, but it can help. And without governance reform, I believe it will be very hard to overcome mistrust. So at the heart of the project board's proposals is our belief that openness, accountability and clarity about who is responsible for which decisions is a vital element in bringing about the cultural change that we need. It's a cultural shift that needs to be embraced by and embedded in the entire leadership and executive of the church, from the archbishops to the most junior members of staff, and including the members of General Synod. We need an approach that takes to heart the lesson of St. John's Gospel, that the truth shall set you free, instead of a culture repeatedly described to us on the project board by Synod members as one of Machiavelli and power play. As a church, we need to be much clearer about where and by whom decisions are taken. For leadership is expressed, yes, through the bishops, but also here in Synod, in the gathering together of clergy and laity in council with the bishops. And if the motion is carried tonight, there will need to be an intense and candid discussion between Synod and the bishops about how strategic decisions for the Church are approved. We need to be clear about how a mandate would be given to the Church's national institutions so that they, in turn, can draw up detailed plans for approval and implementation. Our recommendations involve reform of those national church bodies to give each one a clear set of responsibilities. The Church Commissioners, continuing to be responsible for the investment of the core of the Church's historic assets and determining the quantum of funds available at any time. The National Society, working under its Royal Charter with the Church in Wales and leading on engagement in schools. The Pensions Board, serving more than 40,000 people in its different pension schemes and continuing to support clergy with retirement housing. And a new operational delivery body, which means abolishing the Archbishop's Council and Church of England Central Services, dedicated to serving and supporting the wider Church through the provision of strategic funding, services, advice and guidance. The new charity, Church of England National Services, would coordinate work undertaken at the national level, allocate resources in line with agreed priorities, and ensure effective execution of agreed strategies. It would be responsible for developing policy and bringing such policy for approval through the House of Bishops and the General Synod. We also need to build into our structures better arrangements to ensure a diversity of skills, experience and background among the trustees and committees of SENS, and stronger institutional arrangements for the scrutiny by the Synod of executive decisions. Trustees will be personally responsible in law for the stewardship of very large sums of charitable expenditure, and they will also in practice be important custodians of the Church's public reputation. So whether they come from the Synod or from outside, we need men and women with the experience, skills and time to take on this heavy burden of service. And at the same time, we have to avoid the dangers of groupthink. We need the members of boards and of committees in their backgrounds, their church traditions, ethnicity, age, and the balance between men and women to reflect the diversity of the Church and the nation. And as Paul Boateng and the Racial Justice Commission have argued, good intentions are not enough. So we propose a new specific legal duty to achieve greater diversity with an annual report to Synod so that you can judge progress in terms of action and not just words. Our proposal for a new synodical scrutiny committee crystallised late in our deliberations. We believe that, as set out in our report, members of Synod could use their existing powers to better effect than hitherto, and indeed were surprised to hear from some Synod members that they did not know about the powers already available. But such is the depth of mistrust, and in the light of strong representations from the board's synodical reference group, we've concluded that there's also a need for a synodical scrutiny committee to look at decisions taken by trustees and senior staff and to make recommendations. Now, last night's deep dive will inform further work. My personal view is that the scrutiny committee should meet outside the rhythm of General Synod meetings and use virtual and hybrid meetings as appropriate. And it might also make sense for Synod to elect a panel of scrutiny committee members from which smaller teams could be drawn, each specialising in a specific aspect of church policy in the way parliamentary select committees each scrutinise a particular topic or department. For this system to contribute to rebuilding trust, it'll be essential for trustees and other leaders to welcome scrutiny as a natural part of good governance, and equally, members of that scrutiny committee will need to operate as critical friends and not go in for point scoring or just seeking for somebody to blame. Now, there are other potential reforms that fell outside the remit we were given. The board listened to arguments for a review of parochial and diocesan governance before tackling the national institutions, and heard calls for the operation of synodical governance to be reviewed across the different layers of the church, and we'd support such reviews going ahead. But it is the board's view that we should not delay urgent and necessary reform of the national structures while we wait. Our paper is a compromise. I know that there'll be some here who believe that we have been far too radical, and others would have liked us to go much further. And every member of the project board itself has compromised on one or more aspects of this report to reach a common position. And I'd ask all sides not to let the best become the enemy of the good. We need to find a way to move forward together. So if you approve the motion tonight, there will follow an intense period of further consultation as detailed legislation is drafted and a transition plan drawn up. The Synod would play an important part in that work. And afterwards, when the legislation comes, the process will, as always, allow for line-by-line consideration and for amendments to be debated and decided. So if tonight's decision is to proceed, I hope we will also move forward as swiftly as possible, commensurate with proper scrutiny and debate. Our indicative timetable is just that, indicative. Others, particularly the Business Committee, will decide on the allocation of time, but my knowledge of numerous reorganisations in local government, the health service, schools and other public services tells me that every such shake-up is unsettling for staff. And we owe it to our staff that once decisions have been taken, we try to keep that period of professional and personal uncertainty as brief as possible. If the vote tonight is to reject the motion, then we shall continue with the status quo, despite that being a system with which almost everybody is dissatisfied. So, Madam Chair, I believe we need to find a way back to trusting one another. Our ambition and our intention should be, through clarity of purpose, decision-taking and accountability, to begin that work of rebuilding trust and to equip the national bodies of the Church of England to serve, support and enable the mission of the Church to our entire nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir David. We now move straight to item 16, and I'd like to ask the Bishop of Guildford to speak to item 16. You have up to 10 minutes, Bishop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Andrew Watson, Guildford 20. Friends, I'm grateful, as I'm sure we all are, for Sir David's admirably clear presentation of our proposals as our independent chair, and it has been extremely good having him as an independent chair. And I'm really keen to get on with the debate as soon as we can, so I won't speak for very long. But just a few brief points in addition to Sir David's. Back in February 2022, you may remember, you asked us to bring draft legislation back to General Synod for further consideration. But as we consulted very widely, including with each of the national church institutions, the bishops, our synodical reference group, members of the Faith and Order Commission, and most of the principal NCI committees, it soon became clear that a rush to legislation would be premature. In particular, as you can imagine, we heard a very large number of ideas and perspectives, many of them mutually incompatible, which needed careful thought and sifting. As a result, we brought a further report to Synod in February this year, which some of you may remember led to a very unsatisfactory and truncated debate lasting about 25 minutes. We have returned with rather more detail 5 months later, along with a number of revisions following further detailed consultation with our synodical reference group, the Racial Justice Commission, the bishops and others. Synod will have noted that we included a very ambitious timeline in Annex 2 of our paper, and apologies are due to the Business Committee for a timeline which clumsily included a possible Synod in November 2024, over which our project board has absolutely no control at all. We're very sorry. New Synod members may not be aware that if we pass the motion tonight, as I strongly urge that we do, that is far from the end of the story. As Sir David has reminded us, the next phase provides plenty of opportunities to shape the proposal further as legislation is brought forward, debated and revised and gone through line by line. And we'd really encourage those with an interest, including those who are raising amendments tonight, to get involved with that process. Meanwhile, the project board has been in something of a lose-lose situation when it comes to the level of detail in this report, with too little suggesting that there's something to hide, and too much that everything is sorted and that all we need is to hand Synod a rubber stamp. I hope that it's felt that we've made roughly the right judgment call. Speaking personally, I may have known a little more than Sir David about the governance structures of the NCIs before I picked up this baton from the Bishop of Leeds at the beginning of last year. But the past 18 months have been a steep learning curve into just how convoluted and complex those structures are, preventing us from being appropriately nimble in the face of our many missional challenges and resulting in regular duplication, frustration, and lack of clarity and accountability, with all the waste of time, money, and relational capital that implies. Bringing as much coherence as we possibly can to our governance at national level, as I believe these proposals at least begin to do, won't resolve all of our problems, of course, or fully address the issues of transparency and trust that run like a golden thread through our report. But they'll certainly help, provided that the next stage of the process, while improving on the proposals, as I'm sure it will, doesn't undermine their basic coherence. And so I very much look forward to the debate and move the motion standing in my name.
Thank you, Bishop. This item is now open for debate. The initial speech limit will be 5 minutes. Mandy Ford, Bishop Christopher, and Robin Brims for a maiden speech.
Mandy Ford, Deans 55. Friends, we have heard much during this synod about the need for greater accountability, transparency and trust within the governance of the Church of England. I strongly support the proposals made in GS 2307 because I believe they are a step towards achieving those goals. I have had the privilege of working inside the NCIs for a year as interim director of the National Ministry team. During that time, I attended committees and subcommittees, as well as meetings of Archbishop's Council and the College and House of Bishops. I observed the complexity of the institution, or more properly, institutions, and the tendency of papers to move up and down the system, taking many weeks or even months to work through the decision-making structure. In my experience, the life of the Church is well served by capable and gifted colleagues in the NCIs who work extremely hard. But as the report comments, the repetition of writing and reporting demanded by the current arrangements are not efficient use of their labour or their gifts. For those reasons, I particularly welcome the desire for clarity in where decisions regarding both strategy and operations should be made. Now, if I may, I'd like to speak as one of the Deans of Cathedrals elected to this synod. While the College of Deans is grateful for the recent engagement with the project team, we note that this has come somewhat late in the design process. Moving responsibility for cathedrals from a subcommittee of the Church Commissioners to the newly established SENS Board recognises the way in which cathedrals, as a unique part of the ecology of the Church, contribute to the national vision and strategy and to the mission of the whole. However, there is some concern that the particular contribution made by cathedrals may get lost unless there is a mechanism to ensure that the members of SENS understand that contribution. Synod may need to be reminded that the historical resources of bishops and cathedrals were transferred to the Church Commissioners on the understanding that their work would be supported in perpetuity. That arrangement recognised that the mission of our cathedrals extends beyond the local to the national and the international in their contribution to celebrating our heritage, to theology in the public square, and in service to civic and national life. In recent years, the voice of cathedrals has been exceptionally well articulated in the NCIs through our Third Estates Commissioners. However, I note some ambiguity on page 47 of GS 2307, which states that the work of the Third Estates Commissioner, that is, responsibility for bishoprics and cathedrals, will transfer to SENS, but is silent on the role of the Third Estates Commissioner. For these reasons, I would like to make 3 suggestions to the project board. Firstly, to ask that the project board include or involve someone who can ensure that the voice of cathedrals is heard in the development of this work going forward. Secondly, to invite the project board to articulate a vision for cathedrals within the SENS trust deed as a distinct and valued part of the ecology of the Church of England, and to commit to the ongoing support of cathedrals, recognising the historic obligations of the Church Commissioners and the contribution made by cathedrals to mission. Thirdly, to ensure that a member of SENS and or the Grants Committee is appointed who is specifically responsible for representing the interests of bishoprics and cathedrals. Cathedrals make a significant contribution to the mission and life of the Church. Please ensure they are not forgotten in the process of revising the governance of the Church of England.
Coventry 14, thank you for calling me. The report before us helpfully describes the Church more as an organism than an organisation. The Church is a living reality of relationships. It evolves and adapts to conditions of particular times and places. The Church is also and fundamentally an institution. It is instituted by Christ as a community of witness to proclaim, demonstrate, and embody through history the good news of the kingdom of God that comes to the world in Jesus Christ. As a community of witness through history, a growing and adapting organism, the Church requires organizational systems that continually require adaptation to the time and place in which the Church finds itself. The question to be asked of the report is whether its organizational recommendations work with the character of the Church so that its calling can be more fully realized at this point in history. The situatedness of the Church of England in English history makes that task, as we see in the report, especially complex. Our long relationship with the state, the unique features of our synodical life, our stake in the nation's education, the gift of assets that we steward, the lessons we're learning on safeguarding. I'm grateful for a number of features of the report. First, the way it navigates those historical realities, recognizing that the Church of England will never be neat and entirely streamlined. Second, the responsibilities it places on the bishops to fulfill their calling set out in the ordinal, and thereby to do so together in synod as the house of bishops, as they gather into a whole the community of churches that make up the Church of England. Third, the way the report conceives SENS serving the Church as, to quote, a point of connection, one that joins the local and the national. That's the purpose of the organization of the Church. Points of connection that join, as Ephesians puts it, every ligament of the Church together to nourish its character and release its calling. Perhaps here the report touches on a concept that speaks profoundly about the life of the Church in all its forms. The Church itself as a point of connection that joins divine and human, local, national, and global, past, present and future, bishops, clergy and laity, together as one community of witness to God's saving purposes in the world. There's more work to do, of course, as we've heard, on how to exactly configure in our time and place this character and calling of the church, and how it can be most fully and functionally manifested through every level of its organisation and governance. Among much else, that will include, I suggest, heightening the work of faith, order and unity, structuring it carefully into the system and supporting it properly. But the report lays down a sound foundation to move things forward, and I'm glad to support it. Thank you.
Robin Brims, Newcastle 367. Thank you very much, Chair, for inviting me to make my maiden speech, even if it is 8:45 on a Sunday evening. But it'll be short. I shan't keep you long. I support this report and its recommendations, and the paper you produced is really good, both in content and in tone. Of course, improvements can be made, and we might do some this evening. And I'm sure a lot more will be made as we start to implement it. But above all, it gives us an opportunity to reset how we do things, to build trust and confidence in our governance. I've only been on Synod for less than 2 years, but it's abundantly clear to me that we've got a lot of broken work to attend to. And secondly, we need to meet the ambition and style of our conduct as set out by the Archbishop of York on Friday. We've got to do that, because at the moment, we're showing a lack of respect to each other, and it's very unattractive to anybody outside of this chamber. And we owe it to the people in the middle pews who we represent. And if we approve these structures, the next steps will have to include how people are appointed or elected, or a combination of both, with clear lines of responsibility and accountability. And then we've got to stick to it. On a detail point, I share and I declare an interest as a member of the Newcastle Cathedral Trust that the cathedrals have got to be fitted into this structure clearly. It probably is there, but it's not immediately clear to me, and it clears perhaps not to a dean. So there's something we need to do there to put that right. Thank you for hearing me, and I'll crawl back under my stone now.
Thank you. Synod, I am minded to start dealing with the amendments that we have, given that we have 5. So can I invite Mr. Sam Margrave to speak to and move his amendment? You have up to 5 minutes.
Sam Margrave, Coventry 295. Synod, can I begin by thanking the staff and those who have given their time to develop this work. Synod, words matter. This motion in February read as welcome. Words determine what this Synod is deciding, and it's not to be pedantic, but it's about good governance, and us as a Synod being clear about what we are deciding today. In the past, we have confirmed something and told it's coming back, only for it to happen without any further say or to be told we agreed it, because we previously said we had confirmed it, when that wasn't quite what Synod meant. So my amendment is meant to be helpful and for good governance. If we are to confirm the recommendations, they will be implemented immediately, even while we wait for legislation. But there's still much to speak about. That is why I'm asking for us to change the word to welcome, and for us to decide whether to confirm within the legislative process. Many say the devil is in the detail, but our role in Synod and looking at legislation is finding God in the detail. And so we need to wait to confirm these recommendations when we get to the legislation, which will come back to us. We can look at them part by part, and that is why one word matters so much. I'm worried in particular about the concentration of power, the impact on synod representation, further centralisation, synod being sidelined, and the bishops becoming ever more powerful but unaccountable. However, there is a potential for at least many of these things to be fixed with a fantastic motion, such as that proposed by Rebecca Chapman at number 62, or in the revision process to look at this line by line and recommendation by recommendation. The question, therefore, that I put to you is, are we confirming these recommendations today, or are we, as I hope this amendment says, welcoming the recommendations and looking at the future and further in more detail in future as we legislate for new governance over coming sessions? Finally, I also want to say thank you for the speeches, and I really hope that in future these new committees will welcome public participation as in the Localism Act for local authorities, and that synod members will have access to agendas, reports and minutes in a central place so we can have real overview and properly scrutinised decisions. I hope you can support my amendment. It's just one word, but it does mean an important step in saying what we are doing today. So I move the amendment in my name. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I now invite Bishop Andrew to respond to the amendment?
Thank you very much, Sam, and we welcome. We're very happy to accept this amendment. I think you made a good point, and I also hope that some of the issues that you've raised, some of the concerns that you've raised will be put to rest by the end of this evening, but I'm very happy to accept your amendment.
Yes, go ahead. I would like to see if anybody wanted to speak, especially against the amendment. No, then I will accept that. So we'll have a vote of hands. I'll put the motion for closure. Thank you. So I put the motion for closure on item 58. And I now put that motion to the Synod. Those in favour of the motion for closure, please show. And against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 58 to the vote. I'm now putting item 58 to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? That is carried. Thank you. We now move to Amendment 59, and I'd like to invite Mr. Ian Johnson to speak to his amendment. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ian Johnston, 387, Portsmouth. We are all painfully aware of the trust deficit. We all have an obligation to address it. It should be front and centre of everything that we do. And the cause I want to focus on this evening is oversight, of which we have heard an awful lot so far. Many new to Synod might not know that 25 years ago, Turnbull's proposals, and I encourage you to read them, they're very interesting, looked very much like Ascends. Procedural devices and church politics resulted in our present structure. Look on my works, ye mighty, wrote Ozymandias, and despair. Well, not because of their mightiness, but because of their failures. External oversight is excellent. If we look at the church commissioners and their management of our financial resources, you couldn't ask for better. Internal oversight is not. We do despair sometimes. We think of safeguarding. But this governance review gives us the opportunity to make very necessary changes. Excuse me, this is frozen. I might need some help. Reorganisation of our NCIs is long overdue. SENS will be a very powerful committee and it must have commensurate oversight. We cannot risk otherwise. If we don't get it, we should abandon SENS. I do not say this lightly. I'm a member of the reference group. I've lived with this for 18 months. Just ask my wife. But that is my opinion. Oversight is critical. This oversight can be provided only by Synod. We must create it, we must pay for it, and we should do so gratefully. But how? GS 2307 has many ideas to counter the trust deficit, but oversight is not one of them. The board has handed it back to Synod to facilitate. It must not shrink from this responsibility. It must enable the widest conversation. Excuse me for a minute, and I'll see if I can get this back again. Right, I can't. The amendment allows for statutory change. Can I just get my mobile? The amendment seeks to allow statutory change. Why? Let me give an example. SENS will be a charity. Its trustees, in extremis, will be required by law to pursue its objectives as interpreted by its self-same trustees. We would need a means to ensure in the limit, which is what laws do, that SENS will accept oversight. It will not be just a charity. It will be a church charity. This will require statutory change, a one-line bill. End of example. We need the widest conversation in looking how we provide oversight for SENS. As with all other matters, any actual proposal will come back to Synod for approval. So let's do what needs to be done. We have all the ingredients here to make an excellent cake. GS 2307, with its recognition of the key important issues, a select committee concept that can be adapted to our needs, and particularly I'm thinking of the Choate report here being an example of process. And finally, we have a Synod eager, I suggest, to have the right thing done in its name. So I ask you to vote for the amendment in my name. But finally, I haven't finished. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Now, in an organization, Christian love transmutes to trust, and vice versa. And we need more of it. This is a good project. I've worked on it for the last 18 months. It needs support. It has weaknesses. There is no question about it. And the major weakness, in my view, is the lack of a constructive oversight proposal. But that can be done if we broaden the discussion out to include statutory change so that we're taking all bars off the conversation. And I am convinced that we can come up with a good oversight proposal. We have got a good proposal on SENS. Yes, there are lots of other small things, relatively small things.
Could you
that
move
need
your
dealing with.
amendment? You're out of time, I'm afraid.
I move my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now invite Bishop Andrew to respond to this amendment?
We're very grateful to Ian for the way that he has engaged with our work as a member of the Synodical Reference Group, has regularly contributed to our discussions, especially in this area of Recommendation 3 and in light of the trust deficit that he regularly highlights, although I'm not sure I've heard Ozymandias in that context before. As Sir David indicated in his opening presentation, we have already set out the range of different ways in which oversight and scrutiny of the NCIs is currently undertaken by Synod, and have suggested a realistic approach to developing those further, not least given the frequent observation in our Synodical Reference Group that people are just unaware of what is there already, and there is a fair amount there already. And yet members of Synod would also have noticed the recommendation in our report that we do need an additional development spelt out in Sir David's initial remarks, perhaps designed along the lines of a House of Lords Select Committee, where members with appropriate expertise can ask incisive questions in the spirit of courtesy, mutual accountability, and learning for the future. Having said that, I'm afraid that I cannot accept Ian's amendment, which risks being far too prescriptive at this point of the process when there's still so much for us to learn and discuss. In particular, I'm really concerned that too heavy and inflexible a statutory approach at this stage could result in the normal business of both Synod and SENS being slowed down further, whereas our proposals as a whole are seeking to balance a proper accountability on the one hand with a fleetness of foot on the other. However, I can promise Ian that his voice will be heard as we move to the more detailed consideration of this important area, if you allow us to do that, and of what will or will not need to be included in primary legislation. So I reject this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. As Bishop Andrew does not support the amendment, it will lapse unless 25 members stand or otherwise indicate that they wish the debate on the amendment to continue. And for Zoom, the green ticks, please. Yes, there are more than 25 members standing. This item is now open for debate. The speech limit is 3 minutes. Bishop Sarah. Bishop Philip.
Sarah Mullally, 003, thank you for calling me Chair. I want to thank those that have been involved in this work. I think you've done a lot of hard work, but I don't think we're quite there, as the suggested amendment probably indicates. The purpose of the proposals, as we have heard, is about greater confidence and greater trust. Confidence and trust don't just happen, and I'm glad the report highlights 3 determinants: architecture, leadership, and behaviour. The paper mainly deals with architecture, touches on leadership, but says very little about behaviour. It speaks about principles, but I do believe that we need to go further about behaviour, specifically transparency and kindness. I support the replacement of the Archbishop's Council and the Church of England Central Services. I also support the appointment of the board to include 7 appointed members. However, my most significant concern is, in fact, with the Synodical Committee. We have been considering these proposals, as we have heard, since September 2019. The Synodical Committee appeared only within the last 2 weeks, after the paper had been to the House of Bishops for agreement, without that proposal in it. I support the idea of increased scrutiny, but the proposals have not yet been properly considered. This committee, although mentioned, does not even appear in the proposed structural diagram on page 29. Synod is not a parliament. It doesn't do the same thing as our parliament does. Synod means together on the road. That is our ecclesial model. It would be a shame to adjust this model without further and fuller conversation and consideration on the nature of Synod and its relationship with the other governance structures. Now, I don't support this amendment, but I have grave concerns about the Synodical Committee in this proposal, and I would ask the group to reconsider what it is seeking to do. The original review, chaired by the Bishop of Leeds, that came to Synod in 2019, recommended that we gave serious consideration to the reform of General Synod and the synodical governance generally. The report considered that the lack of clarity about the role of General Synod and scrutiny needed to be resolved. Surely this proposal belongs to a new piece of work which is more widely about Synod and not slipped in here. We have heard today the cost of proposals that have not been fully thought through. So I ask the group to reconsider this proposal, although I will not be supporting this amendment. A final warning. Ian has already mentioned the Turnbull report of 1995. It had the same diagnosis, the same solution, but the proposals were dismantled during the synodical process. We have to support this, but we also have to get it right. Thank you.
Philip North, Bishop of Blackburn, number 8. One of the fascinating things about the Church of England is that literally every member of it thinks that power is held somewhere else. Yeah, I've got it, if only. Synod members often get concerned about accountability, but for clear accountability, you need to know where the power you want to hold accountable is located. In other words, you need clear and transparent structures that can be easily understood and thus scrutinized, and that is exactly what we lack, which is why we get cross and the culture feels so poor. All of which explains why I rejoice in so many of these proposals. It creates far clearer structures, which will identify at least where some of the power lies, and that will make for easier scrutiny. However, I can't accept this amendment precisely because it makes things more complicated again. It would introduce different models of scrutiny for different NCIs, and that's messy. It will create different standards and mechanisms by which different NCIs are held to account, and that's messy. And the joy of the governance review is that it makes things less messy. Every NCI, in my mind, should have a comprehensive, timely, and effective oversight, not just one. I think we do still have work to do on scrutiny. The proposed group is an important one. I'm rather more positive about it, I think, than Bishop Sarah. But there's more to do on working out terms of reference and how it relates to the scrutiny function of Synod. But this amendment will not help us answer those questions. In fact, it will make all of this more complicated rather than less. So I hope that in the spirit of this review, we will resist it.
Jane Ozan. And you. Yes, thank you.
Ozan, Oxford 380. I want to speak in support of what I think is a really crucial amendment at this stage in our synodical journey. And I think it's quite interesting. We've just heard from two bishops who have power, or so many of us feel. And as a member of the Archbishop's Council in its very early days, I was struck, as someone who was completely new to the Church of England, just how complex and messy and diverse those power structures were. And where there is that complexity and mess, ultimately what often happens is there's a small cabal who end up guiding everything. And Synod, which is the larger group, often became the group that we had to manage and get around and navigate. And the House of Bishops saw themselves as the ones who ultimately had power. It was very confusing as a young Archbishop's Council member. But Synod was often seen to the side, and yet we represent the grassroots. And my question this afternoon about to whom was the Archbishop's Council accountable, to which we were ultimately told the Charity Commission, I was expecting the answer to be Synod, because that is to whom everyone should be serving, I think, the grassroots. And unless we put in something clearly statutory at this point. I'm afraid I, for one, do not trust that we will end up with something that Synod can have confidence in, that the people in our pews can have confidence in, and will stop us just relying on a small cabal of nameless people, perhaps, who seem to have all the power at the end of the day. So please, at this point, let us support Ian's important amendment. Thank you.
Sam Wilson, Chester, 282. Synod, we've talked a lot over the last couple of days about mistrust and whose fault it is that we all don't trust each other. And I think we've got to be careful that Synod itself doesn't become a cause of the mistrust. I think sometimes we make it really easy in this chamber to think that it's always someone else's fault. Well, I think sometimes it's our fault. And I think that in the conversation that we've already had in this debate, we've talked about, we heard from Sir David and from Bishop Andrew about the consultation that took place before this legislation that stands, this motion, sorry, that stands before us, and about how that will continue. And I find it interesting that instead, with this particular amendment, there isn't any of that consultation. We're just discussing it in a very short period of time as part of this debate. And so I'd actually ask that we resist this, because I think it needs to go further. I think that we need to look at our synodal structures much more broadly, and I think it needs to be separately from the governance, because you know what, it's our job to do that, and it's not this project board's. So I'll ask that you oppose this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to test the mind of Synod on whether item 59 has been sufficiently debated. I therefore put the motion for closure on item 59. Those in favour of that motion? Thank you. Those against? That's carried. I now put the amendment to the vote. This is Amendment 59. All those in favour? All those against? That amendment is lost. We now move to Amendment 60. So I'd like to invite Mr. Adrian Greenwood to speak to his amendment. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian Greenwood, Southwark 415. I'm coming to you with this this amendment on the back of 3 years service on Archbishop's Council from 2017 to 2020, in which I saw officers and trustees working extremely hard on their duties, seeking to discharge them as faithfully as possible in the best interests of the charity, which is their fiduciary duty. I also observed a number of dislocations, a number of areas of duplication, all set out in the analysis which Sir David presented at the beginning so lucidly, and which are there in GS 2307. So I'm speaking here to support the main motion going through. The analysis is correct, the work needs to be done, and I hope that the Synod will allow this to go forward. At the risk of being accused of salami slicing and doing a Turnbull, or what happened to Turnbull, I am wanting to suggest one relatively minor change. And in so doing, I want to thank the project board, led by Sir David and Bishop Andrew, and I want to thank the supporting staff team who have worked so hard and with great patience and perseverance to bring us to this point tonight. And I particularly want to, they're all sitting there, Stephanie, Harvey, Neela and Maria. We need to thank them because they've spent hours on this stuff, okay, for our benefit. So the point I'm making is anticipating that SENS will be set up. It will be reduced from 19 to 15. I'm concerned that the loss of 4 places is 4 elected places from this synod. And I do think that that balance needs to be corrected, and my amendment seeks to do that. The arguments for this are drawn, in fact, from page 38 of the Archbishop's Council report, which we will attend to tomorrow. But it says this: the Council is not a body of the General Synod. I think that's quite important to understand, but a statutory body established under National Church Institutions measure. But the close relationship between the Council and the Synod, not least because the Council and the committees undertakes a significant amount of work on behalf of the Synod and reports to Synod on their other tasks, is this issue of connection between the Synod and the SENS board that I'm addressing. We've expressed views on establishing a new scrutiny body. That may come back in a different form. I'm suggesting there's a very simple way of dealing with this, which is to ensure that a majority of the new SENS board is either appointed or elected from members of this House, not counting the archbishops who are ex officio. Now, there is still a balance there between election and appointment. I'm not telling the project board how to do that. That'll come back in due course. It'll go through revision and all that stuff. So there's plenty of opportunity to get the balance right. But I would like you to support this amendment just to make sure that we emphasise the strong connection that does exist between Synod and the Archbishop's Council and its successor body. So I move the motion standing in my name. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I invite Bishop Andrew to respond?
Thank you very much, Adrian. We're really grateful again to you for your excellent work on the Synod Reference Group, and thank you very much for this amendment. The Project Board has looked at it. We're very happy to accept this amendment. It accepts the idea of 6 elected and 6 appointed members of SENS, but the implication of the amendment, as you've probably picked up, is that at least one of those appointed members should already be an elected member of General Synod. Given the breadth and experience of skills and experience within this chamber, we don't think that that's a restriction on the SENS membership and are very happy to go with that. In shaping the needs of a board to serve and support the mission of the Church, it's clear that individual members of that board will require specific skills and experience. As an example, and perhaps in initial response to Mandy's point right at the beginning of our debate, we can immediately think of how a member might be appointed, say, to champion the vital mission and ministry of our cathedrals within the trustee body. So we're very happy to accept this amendment.
Yes. I wouldn't. I would prefer to see if anybody would like to speak first. This amendment's open for debate. Yes, go ahead. And the gentleman in the beige suit.
Bruce Bryant Scott, Europe 113. I'm sorry, I'm a Canadian, you may know that now. I keep on comparing things to my 15 years on the General Synod there, and I would just note that a comparable body to the proposed CENS was our Council of General Synod, and it had initially, I think they changed it, 30 members, all of whom were elected from General Synod. So I speak in favor of this amendment. I think it is, regardless of how we conceive through statutes and so forth, the relationships of the General Synod and the proposed SENS, there has to be a degree of accountability, and perhaps more importantly, there has to be ownership of the actions of this new Church of England National Services body by this body. Representation doesn't guarantee that that will happen, but it certainly goes an awful long way. I just want to affirm my excitement over the main motion and the proposals that were contained in GS 2307. I'm an old ecclesiastical bureaucrat, and after 6 hours of what was the 8-hour debate that we had on LLF, a small group of us gathered in Church House to hear the proposals such as they existed in February, and simpler, more effective, assisting the mission of the church, transparent. What's not to like?
Thank you. Just to remind you, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Ross Meikle, Oxford 185. I think I'm resisting the amendment because of accountability. I think if General Synod is being called to hold the Church of England national systems to account, then if we are the majority on one of those boards, are we kind of scuppering ourselves in some kind of way? I haven't really thought much more beyond that, really. And apart from as well, that yes, we have skills within this synod, but how do they end up being on that group? How are they chosen? Synod can feel like a battlefield between two opposing sides where people are trying to get someone from their team onto the right board. I don't know that that is what we ought to be. I would much rather that we were able to hold the church to account. And I suppose I'm concerned that we lose the ability to hold ourselves as a good, accountable body if we are the ones who are the majority on that council. So I think I want to resist. Thank you.
Thank you. I would be minded to test the mind of Synod, yes. So I wish to test the mind of Synod on whether item 60 has been sufficiently debated. I therefore put a motion for closure on item 60. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? That's clearly carried. So we now move to vote on the amendment. This is amendment 60. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? That amendment's carried. Thank you. We now move to Amendment 61, and I'd like to invite Mr. Clive Billinist to move his amendment. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, members of Synod. Clive Billinist, 306 Diocesan Europe. If you dig deep inside the document, which you have to for my amendment, and take yourselves to page 51, don't bother, I'll tell you about it, there are a couple of paragraphs in which the most exciting part of the whole document appears, which is the appointment of the SENS Audit and Risk Committee. Who laughed? At the moment, as the paper stands, the members of that committee will be appointed, if you follow down to paragraph 139, to the SENS Governance and Nominations Committee. We are synodically governed, and I submit that it's right that the Synod is represented on this committee as it is now on the Archbishop's Council Audit Committee. However, in my world, I like to say better elected than selected. So I ask to maintain the Synod's right to choose its representatives there, and this is what my proposed amendment will achieve. And I'm asking that 2 representatives to enable us to potentially have 1 member of each house of clergy and laity, and also to allow at least 1 person, hopefully, to be present at each meeting. Please note I make no proposal for a percentage of total membership, because we may be 2 amongst 10, 2 amongst 20. It doesn't matter. We wish to be there to serve and not to dominate. You've heard this afternoon about the range of financial governance and risk issues which confront any large and complex organisation like the Church of England, and sins will be bigger. Its creation will be complex, and it will need a lot of help and support in getting its structures right. So I hope you will ensure that your elected representatives can play a full part in the scrutiny of our church and allow us to serve you. I beg to move the amendment standing in my name.
Thank you. Can I invite Bishop Andrew to respond?
Thanks very much to Clive Billness for this one. We're very happy to accept this. And this is a really good example of something I said at the beginning about how much detail to put in the report at this stage and so on. It seems absolutely clear that SENS will need a properly functioning audit and risk committee, and absolutely clear that at least 2 members, elected members of General Synod should be on it. So we have absolutely no problem with this at all. And perhaps it's good just to fill in a bit more colour on this part of the process. In supporting this amendment, I'd also like to say, of course, there will be other committees who will be answerable to SENS, which will also have elected membership. It's just we've chosen not to put too much colour in, not least so that the basic structural design can continue to be developed. And just one other thing, I mean, when we do have elected members of General Synod on our audit committee at the moment, it is a very good way of holding us to account. And yet very often we don't have elections for those roles. We find it difficult to get people to stand. People do stand and they get onto them. But I think this is an area where we could challenge one another to actually take more interest in this aspect of the Synod's oversight and scrutiny of what we're doing.
Thank you. This amendment is open for debate. I see no one standing. I'll move straight to a vote. Amendment 61. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? That's clearly carried. Thank you. We now move to Amendment 62. I'd like to invite Mrs. Rebecca Chapman to come and move her amendment.
Rebecca Chapman, Southwark 414. Thank you, Chair. I hope I won't have Ian's technical difficulties, Synod, but forgive me if I go very fast and feel very, very nervous. I've not done this before. Synod, what do you think our national church structures should look like for the next, say, 50 years? To quote the Spice Girls, I mean, it is an evening, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. From all that we have heard this afternoon, we are acutely aware right now of the influence, for good or for bad, that our national church and its governance structures have on the life and on the reputation of our church. How we structure our governance really, really matters. Thank you for being here for this debate, for caring about this matter, about our governance. I'm aware I'm the last amendment, so thank you for hanging on in there for the whole thing. For some people, I know, the 68-page report before us may have felt like a lot. I am so pleased we have this report before us. There is so much that is good in it. A huge amount of work and time has gone into this report, and much of it is excellent. I'm really grateful for the work done by the staff, from the project board, the reference group, and especially for the focus on trust that we see here in this report. I absolutely agree with Sir David that things do need to change. We cannot keep the bureaucratic triangle in place. After today, perhaps it feels like we have never needed change more. But we need the right change, Synod. We have in the papers before us 17 recommendations. They're quite hefty. We are being asked to send them through here in a single vote. Much of it is good. There are positive proposals for a new scrutiny committee, that our committees will have more clarity about their roles and their responsibilities. Some of us today might be asking questions about the key role of our archbishops at the centre of the governance, especially when so many demands are placed on their time, their precious time, elsewhere. There are other recommendations I'm a bit less confident about, the unknowns around the new nominations committee. There is much here that is unknown. There is still a real lack of clarity about accountability, as Jane mentioned earlier. Synod, I want us to openly and transparently debate the pros and cons of each recommendation, to be intentional about this and to understand, each of us, what we are choosing for the future of our church, so that we can minimise unexpected, unintended consequences. For me, this is about trust, this is about tweaks, and this is about our time. On trust, Synod, we have heard again and again about the issue of trust. You'd almost get bored of it if it wasn't so terribly important. Some people claim we're being managed. The report itself recommends a radical response to the levels of mistrust that currently exist. Given that, I think these proposals about the future of our national church need more than a nod this evening. They deserve our time and our attention. Synod should be able to scrutinise them one in turn, and I'm really grateful for the extensive consultation that's been made reference to this evening, but I want us to make a clear choice on each aspect before we actually approve legislation. As Sir David himself said earlier, good intentions and words are not enough now, given the levels of mistrust.
Could you move your amendment?
Oh, sorry. So time, we've been told there's not enough time for this. I think it's important enough that we should make time. Bishop Sarah said yesterday, it's important to do things well and not just fast.
Could you move your amendment?
Sorry, I duly move my amendment.
Thank you. Bishop Andrew, if you'd like to respond.
I'm very grateful to Rebecca for the care that she's given to reading and digesting our report and for her enthusiasm for much of its contents. But I really would wish to resist this amendment very strongly and encourage Synod to do so. That's not to say that our proposals are perfect, but the process of refining the legislation to support change will itself enable detailed and careful consideration with adequate time for those conversations to take place. Indeed, I'd encourage Rebecca to get involved with that stage of the process to ensure that her and other concerns are heard and reflected in the draft legislation. Were Synod to accept this amendment, there will be inevitable delay, certainly as far as next November, additional costs both financially and in terms of staff morale. And I think we do need to listen to what Sir David said at the beginning, that spinning a process out endlessly is really not helpful at all. There has been, as has been recognised, huge consultation, both in the initial paper, in the group chaired by the Bishop of Leeds, and in the last 18 months. Stephanie and Harvey and I and one or two others have been charging around all kinds of different groups and getting different perspectives, which are really fed into this. And there is a real danger of salami slicing here as well. There's absolutely no question that these proposals can be improved on and that the legislative process, if you allow it to get that far, will really do that. But the idea that we vote on one proposal after another at this stage or in November would really be disastrous. The danger is we just pull apart something that is quite coherent in itself rather than actually moving forward. And we know from previous synodical process, I'm old enough to remember not quite the Turnbull report, but certainly the Hind report on theological education, and that's what happened to that, and it became really, by the end, quite a dog's dinner. And I sometimes think if we're going to have a dog's dinner, better the dog's dinner that you know than a dog's dinner that you don't. Also, you know, this process already has taken 3 years. On our optimistic, over-optimistic timeline, it's likely to take another 3 years through the legislative process, and that's quite optimistic. And so the idea of kind of putting it back with actually not a lot to do between now and November for those who are working on it, I think would be really a really bad idea. And so, Synod, if you're in support of most of what is in here, obviously recognising that there's still a lot of work to be done, in which synodical involvement will be very much there. I mean, by the end of this process, for those who are new on Synod, you may not know this, but we will go through clause by clause, not just proposal by proposal, but clause by clause at that stage of the legislative process. I just urge you not to slow things down at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. As Bishop Andrew has resisted the amendment, do I see 25 members standing? And green ticks on Zoom. I do see 25 members standing. This amendment is now open for debate. Speech limit is 3 minutes. I call Luke Appleton. The gentleman there he is.
Hello, Luke Appleton, Exeter 309. I think with the current agenda that we've had in the previous few years of Synod, there's not been a huge amount of oxygen in the room for the governance and the scale of it. And I'm just reminded of how much talk there was before Synod got going with LLF and with some of our safeguarding issues, and how all of that chatter disappeared and how lightly attended February's session was. And I've spoken to several members this weekend who have not or have been struggling to grasp all of the proposals. And then I reflect upon the fact that we talked today about improving accountability, about Synod having teeth, about us being urged to be a doing and not just a talking body. And so I would strongly support what Rebecca is proposing, because it's about time, I think, we put our money where our mouth was when it comes to accountability. Thank you.
Roy Faulkner, Leicester 333. I detect a hint in Rebecca's comments about the fact that she's concerned that we keep the speed of things going. And I think there's a tendency with all of this to suggest that we could come back again in November and February and nothing really more had taken place to improve things. And I want to just add a little bit to that, in the sense that I think a lot of us feel that there have been gaps in what's being proposed in this sort of thing, particularly in the area of diocesan administration and control. And I would very much like to carry on the lines that David mentioned in his introductory speech, that on page 6, paragraph 9, some disappointment that diocesan and synodical governance was not considered. And again on page 10, conclusion 24, suggests that there should be further diocesan reviews. So can I ask Synod to act on these recommendations by supporting my private member's motion entitled Reform of Diocesan Working Practices,
this is not on topic,
which asks Synod to become a working group for diocesan reform at the earliest possible opportunity.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop
you.
you. Thank you. I do now wish to test the mind of Synod on whether item 62 has been sufficiently debated. I therefore put the motion for closure on item 62. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? That's carried. Yes? If I put my question first, I would now like to put Amendment 62 to the vote. Yes. Do I see 25 members standing? Yes, I do. This is a counted vote of the whole Synod on item 62. Those present in Central Hall using voting handsets and who wish to vote in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. And those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. Those participating remotely should use the online voting platform and vote or register an abstention using the buttons on screen.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period is now ended.
On item number 62, those in favour, 83. Those against, 260. 15 recorded abstentions. Therefore, this item is lost. We now return to the main motion as amended by 58, 60 and 61. Yes, Bishop.
Nick Baines, 22, Bishop of Leeds. I just want to make 1 or 2 points about this. I totally support the report and the motion before us and thank the group for the work that they've done. But a number of things have been said that I think we need to be realistic about. I was around, because I'm much older than you are, Andrew. I was around through the Turnbull debates. And it died the death of 1,000 qualifications because the vested interests all tried to defend their bit. That's why we have what we have now, which we knew at the time was not going to be adequate. So if we're going to do this, we have to have a degree of courage. When we created the Diocese of Leeds 9 years ago, we knew that loads of questions weren't going to be answered. We knew that some of the stuff was a bit bonkers, and there was lots we didn't know. But at some point in this church, you have to have the courage to change. And if we won't do it ourselves, even in radical ways, we shouldn't expect anyone else to take us seriously. But the Bishop of London referred to culture. And it seems to me we need a few definitions here. I thought it this afternoon in relation to the word independence. I think people use it to mean different things. And so definition would help. My definition of culture, which I just scribbled down while sitting down there, is it's the collective behaviours that are derived from decisions made according to criteria that are rooted in particular values. That is what culture is. It's not some amorphous mass of stuff. It's not something that descends on you. It's not the pool you swim in. It's the decisions that we make and the way we choose to behave. That's why, if we want to talk about trust, and Ian Paul mentioned this yesterday, we choose to trust. I mean, I have clergy who let me down all the time. So, CDM I'm very familiar with, but I still choose to trust the clergy. And trust is a choice. It develops as we do the work together. It's not a product or a commodity that can simply be engineered before we start the real work. And finally, I have 3 cathedrals. I have a trinity of deans who all would endorse what was said earlier about cathedrals. That's part of the iterative process that this report has set up. Let's have the courage to go ahead.
Stephen Hogg leads 328. Change is always first experienced as loss. I came across that phrase when I was doing my master's in change management. That's how sad I am. I declare an interest. I have been on the reference group only for a year, and it has been hell. There have been times when the discussions have been difficult, but I fully support this motion. There have been times when we've had vested interest, protectionism, fear. And just a few months ago, I would have voted against this motion. The improvements, even in the past weeks, have been significant. A huge amount of work, thank you, Stephanie Harvey, sorry I was so rude to you, has been phenomenal. And I'm delighted with the amendments that have been passed and those that have been lost. This report faces head-on some of the issues that prevent change. Trust, we're finally admitting it. Scrutiny, not yet defined, but it's there, the door is open. I don't think this report's brave enough. I want a fully appointed board with no ex officio members, not even archbishops, sorry, Your Grace. But I'm prepared to give way and not die in that ditch, because what we have in front of us now is a significant improvement on what we were looking at 6 months ago. Please vote for this. Let's take it forward. We've got time to sort it out clause by clause if there are things we don't like. Change is always first experienced as loss, but sometimes change is just the opportunity we need. Thank you.
John Spence. Sonia Barrett. I'm Sonia Barrett. 2 minutes. I've changed your speech limit. Sorry.
John Spence, Archbishop's Council 467. I wanted to express my profound gratitude to Bishop Andrew and the team for all the work they've done, and actually my profound relief that that final amendment was lost. When I was persuaded 3 years ago to stay on for the final 2 years I am legally permitted to do, it was in the expectation that this work would be completed and enacted as I left, and we are already 2 years away from it. Meanwhile, I have continued taking papers to different committees for 3, 4, and even 5 times for debate. I have sat on up to 14 boards at a maximum level, and we just need simplification. And on this piece about trust, some of you were here 9 years ago when I spoke in the Women and Bishops debate. 32 years ago when I lost my eyesight, I had 3 things. I had my wonderful wife, Yvonne, who stays with me. I have faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, and that stays with me more than ever. And I had trust in my fellow humans. And I say to you, my dear friends, very rarely in that last 32 years has that trust ever proved to be misplaced. We're wonderful people. We love each other. We love Christ. Let's trust each other and walk together.
Sonia Barron, Lincoln 149. Thank you for calling me. To serve, support, encourage and enable the whole work of the Church across the nation is the strapline for this paper, and I want to emphasise and welcome this motion, and I support it with its amendments. As a black woman in our Church, I have to say that it hasn't felt that the whole work of the Church has been as inclusive as it could be. I know there are others who may feel the same for other reasons of difference. So I stand to speak to welcome the diversity charter recommended in paragraph 94. The first sentence of the second paragraph of the paper says, the review seeks to give greater confidence and build trust in the National Church's decision-making processes. Veronica Hope Haley, who's done a lot of work in the area of trust, speaks about the importance of the breach for the individual that has to be repaired before trust can be restored. There are many people in the chamber here today, as we have heard from the speeches, previous speeches, and questions in other sessions, the importance of this. In the report of in April 2021 of the From Lament to Action report, it says our mandate flows not from identity politics, but from our identity in Christ. This is our primary identity. In the same report, we have talked about culture change, and I really do believe that this motion will give us that. We've damaged, the report also says we've damaged the image of God, we've damaged the church, most of all we've damaged those we've victimized more unconsciously very often. The breach needs to be repaired, and I believe and hope that the Diversity Charter, if it isn't just treated as window dressing, might go some way towards repairing that breach. As a church, we've said and written many words about diversity in all its forms, including racial justice, and the key driver for the task force report was to see action instead of more words. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to test the mind of Synod that, on whether item 16 has been debated sufficiently. That's not actually a point of order. I therefore put the motion for closure on item 16. Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? That's carried. We now move to Bishop Andrew, if he'd like to respond to the debate. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Madam Chair and Synod members, thank you so much for a really helpful and good-natured debate. Thank you very much for those who've taken the trouble to read the report, to move amendments. I think those have each resulted in some really fruitful conversations. Thank you for some really helpful theological input from a number of people, from Bishop Christopher Coxworth, from Bishop Nick. Trust is a choice. Really, really important to us to reflect on that. John Spence had a immensely inspiring contribution on trust, and change is just the opportunity we need. That's another phrase that will stick in my memory from this debate. Thank you very much for those. Thank you for varying experience that has been brought to bear on this debate. Mandy Ford's experience of working in the NCIs and as a cathedral dean, and that joint experience was really, really helpful in Mandy's contribution. And Mandy, we do recognise we need to do more work on the cathedral side, and we look forward to continuing to discuss that with you and the deans. Thank you very much for Robin Brims giving a great maiden speech, and speaking about his experience as sort of new boy in General Synod, and actually some of the issues that he's faced, and again emphasising that issue of trust, which has come up very regularly. And David Bryant-Scott comparing the Synod here with the Synod in the Church of Canada. Thank you that even those who are critical of aspects of the report, which I totally understand, we can certainly make it better. But those who are critical of certain aspects have also spoken very positively about a lot of what we've sought to do, and that is brilliant and really helpful. Thank you very much for a number of excellent suggestions that have come up. Obviously, as you know, this work is balancing a whole number of different aspects and balancing power among different aspects of church life. And we are very conscious of Bishop Nick's challenge towards the end of our debate, that actually we don't want it simply to die by 100 amendments. And at the same time, we do recognise that it's, in my view, and I hope your view, is a good report that can become better, and the legislative process will really help that. Lots of other really helpful contributions. I probably can't name many more, but thank you very much. And particularly, towards the end, Stephen Hogg, sort of, how does this actually relate, and how's the reference groups all contributed there? And Stephen's own reflections, which I think others would share, that there have been a lot of frustrations along the way for those who've worked on this work. And yet actually we have found a way through. And I do want to pay tribute, as Adrian Greenwood did so helpfully in his amendment, especially to two people behind me, to Steph and Harvey, who've done an absolutely magnificent work, and those who work with them. And also to pay tribute to Sir David Liddington. You've seen him in action tonight, and just how helpful a perspective that he brings as someone who is certainly independent of the governance of the church. And that's been immensely helpful. At one stage, it was thought that I should be chairing this, and then someone said, but you've got a vested interest. And I had to say, yeah, I suppose I have got a vested interest. We've all got vested interest in this. And actually really helpful, I think, to have that example of bringing in a really experienced person to be an independent chair of that body. And we've hugely valued your wisdom, David. Thank you very much indeed. So I want to say thank you to the project board. We've worked pretty hard. To the Synod reference group, we've been meeting most months for the last year and a half. We've been working hard as well. And this sort of merry-go-round of different committees and groups that Steph and Harvey have been working around, each of which have engaged in different ways with this process. We're really very grateful for hundreds of people who've contributed one way or another. Synod, a chastening day like today has sharpened our awareness of the challenges that surround our existing governance arrangements and the urgent need for greater transparency and clarity to help rebuild trust, so that safely and together we can release the full energy, creativity and fruitfulness of the body of Christ in parishes across our nation. It's clear that we're going to need to do more work on scrutiny, and we do absolutely pick up some of the concerns around that, and especially the relatively late way in which that has been introduced in this particular form into our report. We acknowledge that, and I'm sure there's more work to be done on that. And these proposals as a whole are not perfect. Quite a number of them, as we have said, haven't been fully coloured in yet. And even over the past hour and a bit, we've heard many suggestions which I think could further improve them. But I would ask you, please, to approve that this work goes through to the next legislative phase. As Sir David mentioned in his opening speech, let's not allow the best to become the enemy of the good, but rather give us the green light tonight so that this vital work can continue to be refined. Did I get that wrong, the wrong way around? I did, didn't I? Oh, I've got a red light. Okay, I will shut up. Please vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you. I now put item 16 to the vote. Yes, your point of order.
Matt Beer, Lichfield 143. Please may we have a count of the whole synod? A vote account of the whole synod?
Yes, that will be fine. So just to remind Synod, we are voting on item 16 as amended. This is a counted vote of the whole Synod. Those present in Central Hall using voting handsets and who wish to vote in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2, and those who wish to record an abstention should press 3. Those participating remotely should use the online voting platform and vote or register an abstention using buttons on the screen.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period is now ended.
Item 16, those in favour, 328. Those against, 17. Abstentions, 10. Therefore, this motion is carried. Thank you, Synod. Before I ask the Archbishop to give us a blessing, I would just like to let you know there's a service of Compline in Berwick Saul building at 10:10 p.m.
Dear friends, if you're able to, for a moment, shall we stand? And as we hold this day before God and ask for his blessing upon us through the coming night and for the guidance of his Spirit in all that we do, we seek his peace. The Lord be with you. May the Lord go before you to guide you. May he stand behind you and give you strength. May his love watch over you and keep you always in his peace. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit be upon you and remain with you always. Amen.